Hey everybody, and welcome to Misconceptions of the Colonial Witch Trials Long Overdue, video number 5. I was inspired to continue this video series now, after 2 years, to shed new light on circumstances surrounding the accused and accusers, as well as how the new research that has come to light affects the information previously perpetrated for the last 333 years. Viewing history through the eyes of our ancestors is not about excusing past wrongs or adopting old belief systems. It is about understanding the personal environments of those who lived long before us using our own critical thinking. This allows us to build a historical empathy, avoid a distorted and simplistic view of the past, and ultimately to gain a more profound understanding of the human journey. Placing the Salem witch trials or any historical witch hunt within a simplistic view serves a great injustice. The stories of both the accused and the accusers need to be told with the sincerity and candor deserved, using the primary sources and original documents we have available. Many of you know that I descend from 4 wrongfully accused in 1692, Susanna Martin, Sarah Wilds, Mary Estey, and Esther Elwell, and that my heart always goes with them first and foremost, as well as all of those that were accused and hanged or executed. I am also a descendant of Captain John Putnam and Bray Wilkins. The sad thing about Captain John is that because of his surname, he has been linked to his brother's family, lumping him in those, and I quote, evil, problematic Putnams. More on him in a minute. Since I've only recently discovered my connection to Bray Wilkins, I need to do some more in-depth research before I comment any further on his life. More on him in a few weeks or months, depending on my schedule. However, Salem the podcast did a magnificent episode on John Willard, which includes Old Bray, which I will link in the details and the comment sections where this video is uploaded. The truth that I conclude thus far about Captain John Putnam, according to available primary sources, is this: he was not a saint. My most recent research uncovered the fact that he and his future wife, Rebecca Prince, did the hokey pokey after their marriage contract was made, but before they were married. Yes, I know. A lot of couples did this, but like it or not, it was illegal and went on the court records against him. Then he ran a wrestling ring and got into trouble one night when an adversary who basically wanted John dead for some unknown reason entered the circle on horseback and shot John in the face. He only survived because the bullets in those days exited the gun barrels in a circular motion. His actual injuries are not known. And then there's George Burroughs, who was a minister at Salem Village, and he lived with John and Rebecca, from whom he borrowed money to pay for his wife's burial. And George left town because he was not paid his minister salary. Unfortunately, he left town before his debts were paid. However, sometime later, he did return to Salem to settle his accounts and to collect his overdue salary. Captain John Putnam had him arrested for the unpaid debt of his wife's funeral. A court eventually found that George did not owe John anything. In fact, the village owed George back pay. So the arrest and the public humiliation of the event probably caused animosity between the two men. On the other hand, John, whom records show as a fiery guy, was a force of nature when he met the Esteys and the towns and the woods at the boundary line between Topsfield and Salem Village threatening to physically defend what land he thought was his. And today, that is the Donna Bristle Trail between Topsfield and Salem Village, right on that boundary line. After much research, I conclude that John had every reason to believe that land was his, even if it wasn't. Visit me when I give a vivid account of the Topsfield boundary dispute on September 22nd in 2025 at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead as part of my presentation on Mary Estey. And you will also discover at that time why I believe that the Topsfield and Salem Village boundary dispute had nothing to do with the Salem witch trials. But it's a really interesting story. The information regarding this presentation will be in the details of this video and in the comments section wherever this video is posted. In his testimony in 1692, Captain John Putnam and his wife stated that they believed their family members, John Fuller and Rebecca Shepherd, died of malignant fever and not due to bewitchment. This directly contradicted the prevailing belief that witchcraft was responsible for their deaths. The fact that a high-ranking family member like Captain John Putnam would publicly defend Rebecca Nurse is a testament to the deep-seated divisions within this community. It also shows that the accusers, particularly Thomas Putnam Jr., a nephew to Captain John, and Thomas Jr.'s family, were not universally supported, even by their own kin. Believe it or not, it is true when I say here that only a handful of the huge Putnam gang living in Salem Village were accusers. In fact, the accusers only reflected 12 to 15% of all the family, including the in-laws who married the Putnam women. And that information comes directly from Richard Trask, Salem Witch Trials historian and archivist for the town of Danvers, Massachusetts. And Danvers, of course, today is Old Salem Village. In fact, of the 39 who signed the petition for Rebecca Nurse, 8 were Putnams: Captain John Putnam Sr. and his wife Rebecca, Joseph Putnam, the half-brother of Thomas Putnam Jr., Jonathan Putnam, Lydia Putnam, Nathaniel Putnam Sr., who was Captain John's brother, and then 2 different women named Sarah Putnam. And they all signed in defense of Rebecca. Listen to Richard Trask's interview with Aaron Mankey, linked in the details of this video and in the comments wherever this video is posted. Then there is Ann Putnam Sr. A deep dive into original documents paints a picture of Anne, who definitely suffered underlying trauma early in her own life at the hands of her own mother, Elizabeth Carr. Long before Anne was born, her eldest sibling and sister, Elizabeth Jr., was shipped off to Boston at 3 years old to live with Elizabeth Sr.'s sister, Mary Oliver. Though Anne may not have been affected by this decision made long prior to her birth, she probably never fully understood the reasons as a young girl. However, what would have had implications was shortly after Anne was born, her sister, 8-year-old Sarah, was also sent to live at Boston, most likely with the same aunt. Again, no reason has yet to be uncovered as to why these 2 older sisters were sent away and the rest of the children stayed at home. I wonder if Anne feared being shipped off to live with another family throughout her young life before she got married. Also, as most living in New England colonies in this time, Anne's father, George Carr, passed on the belief of bewitchment to his children. A key piece of testimony in 1692, long after George Carr Sr. died, came from George Carr's son, Richard Carr. He claimed that in 1679, being with his brother and father, after a dispute between his father and Mary Bradbury, he saw Mary turn into a blue boar that darted at his father's horse, causing it to stumble. This was presented as evidence of witchcraft. It was the superstitious belief passed down to George and his sons that was carried over from Old England that stuck in this instance. This is a belief that was very real to them. It was part of their invisible world, which was intertwined with the physical world at every turn back in those days. That George was a well-educated man who was a successful shipwright and owned an island, in addition to connecting towns up and down the northeastern seacoast, or at least land that connected those two towns, shows that bewitchment was accepted by people of all educational backgrounds and, obviously, passed to their children. Another aspect of Anne's early life documented, which came to light in primary sources, is that according to her brother-in-law, James Bailey, Anne was most likely the least favorite child living in her home before she married. George Carr died intestate, saying to James that he was too sick to draw up a will. Therefore, he would leave it to the courts to decide how his estate would be distributed. Therefore, the guy left an absolute mess, causing the family to pit the sons against the daughters and the daughters' husbands. The son-in-law most vocal was obviously James. He wrote a petition stating that his wife was a favorite daughter of George Sr. and should get her rightful inheritance. Can you imagine how Anne Putnam would have felt about this cutting declaration? I mean, this is stated in a court document, never to be erased from history. No matter if James just wanted rightfully his through his wife. I still find this extremely hurtful, but comment with your thoughts on this statement below. Would love to know what you think. However, James goes on to say that Elizabeth Carr Sr. did favor the sons, and based on her own petition, he's not wrong. He reasoned Elizabeth cleverly worked behind the scenes to settle the estate among her boys, leaving the daughters out of their entire inheritance at the time of their father's death. Elizabeth directed in her petition, Anne and Mary had already received the minuscule dowries, and Sarah had been taken care of by her husband's family. Since her eldest daughter, Elizabeth, had already passed, she stated that her grandson, James Woodmansey, would be taken care of by his father's family, though George loved James like his own son. Elizabeth wanted to live on Carr Island with her sons, John and James. So this was the woman who was Anne's mother, someone who seemingly wanted to cheat her daughters of their rightful massive inheritance to keep it for herself and her sons. The fact that the 3 surviving daughters were cut out by their mother, one being sent to live in another household, one being declared as being a favorite of George's, leads me to my original conclusion based on the information available thus far, that Anne was most likely the least favorite child, especially since her brothers and mother stood to be given most of the whopper of a fortune that was left behind by George Carr Sr. But all is not well that Elizabeth Sr. originally wanted for her kids after her death. Stay tuned for my publication with more details on Anne's early life to be published in September. Again, I welcome your insights on these circumstances. Anne's childhood, plus the loss of a child in 1690, which is heartbreaking beyond my comprehension, is also coupled with the fact that she had birthed a child about 4 months before the accusations began in 1692. Is there a possibility that Anne was experiencing postpartum depression along with the lingering grief of losing an infant 2 years prior? Possibly. Is there a possibility that Anne, or even her daughter Anne Jr., experienced psychosomatic or psychomatic disorder? Also possible. Physical symptoms from this disorder arise due to stress, anxiety, and depression. All three of these were most likely present because of the girls displaying symptoms of functional impairment with no known neurological cause. These symptoms could have presented all of them to act out due to the stress from the community and the actions being displayed by each other within a very small dwelling. Maybe the only way to express their grief is to unknowingly act out with the belief that these were real symptoms of a real illness, a form of coping mechanism, if you will. There are so many other mental health factors regarding what some of the other accusers experienced, which will be discussed in other videos, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, displayed by those accusers who lived on the frontier in Maine before they came to live in Salem, the results of physical and sexual abuse, as well as sleep paralysis, which seems to be present and well described in some of the depositions. Though sleep paralysis, something from which I personally have suffered in the past, may not be under the umbrella of mental health, it certainly needs to be addressed as a factor in 1692, especially in those depositions. In closing, here is a simplistic view of the trials. I'm going to go back and rephrase that. In closing here, a simplistic view of the trials often casts the accusers as purely malicious and the accused as entirely innocent victims. However, a more nuanced look at primary sources reveals a complex web of motivations, beliefs, and social pressures. Agree or disagree? I welcome well-informed comments here. Engaging in a great discussion is vital to perpetuate historical accuracy. Let me know what misconceptions you would like for me to cover in future videos. Please give this YouTube video a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Either way, it helps the algorithm and helps to spread education on our shared passion. I will also include the latest episode of the Thing About Salem podcast in the details and the comments where this video is uploaded, because Josh and Sarah research hard to inform listeners about the Salem witch trials. The content will blow your mind. My next misconception video will upload on Wednesday, September 3rd, no later than 5 p.m. Thank you all for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon. Thank you.